Settle in, get comfortable, and let your eyes get heavy as we slip into a corporate revenge tale where the smartest move is looking helpful, right up until the moment the thief realizes the gift they stole is a Trojan horse. I used to think credit was a currency, that if you earned it, people would respect it, that if you built something real, the room would feel the weight of it, and, eventually, your name would stick to your work like a label no one could peel off. Then I met Camden Rusk. Camden wasn't my boss on paper. That's the first detail that makes this kind of story possible. On paper, my boss was Helen Matsura, Director of Strategy for the Partnerships Division at Aurum Meridian, one of those companies that called itself a platform because corporation sounded too heavy, too honest. Aurum Meridian didn't sell one thing. It sold outcomes, it sold growth, it sold words. Camden Rusk was Senior Vice President, Special Initiatives. No department, no direct reports that stayed longer than a year, no clear job description besides the one that mattered most. He had the CEO's ear, and he used it like a weapon. The first time Camden stole from me, I didn't even recognize it as theft. It happened the way it always happens in the beginning, quietly, like a draft under a closed door. I'd been at Aurum Meridian for 20 months, which in a place like that meant I was still new, still trying to prove I could keep up. I worked in a glass-walled pod with a view of the river and a view of my own reflection if I angled my laptop just right. My days were a blur of data pulls, vendor calls, and quick syncs that weren't quick at all. I survived on green tea, protein bars, and the kind of ambition that keeps you awake even when you're exhausted. We had a problem that quarter. Churn. Not a dramatic churn, not a scandal. The boring kind that kills you slowly. The kind where customers don't rage quit. They just drift. They finish a contract. They don't renew. They say it's budget. They say it's timing. They say, maybe next year. And your dashboard bleeds red like a wound that won't clot. So I built a retention strategy that didn't rely on begging. Aurum Meridian's model was complicated enough to make a person feel stupid on purpose. We partnered with mid-size enterprises to optimize procurement and logistics, promising savings through our algorithms and a network of approved vendors. Our clients didn't buy software, they bought a story about efficiency. But stories wore out. People wanted proof, and proof was always late. I realized we were losing renewals because we only spoke to the client's procurement team. We treated them like a single organism, like one inbox. But the people who felt the benefit of our work weren't procurement. They were operations managers, warehouse leads, regional controllers, the folks who didn't get invited to fancy quarterly reviews, but who suffered when shipments were late and costs spiked. So I proposed a stakeholder map program, simple in concept, disciplined in execution. For every client, we would identify the 5 to 10 individuals downstream who experienced our value, and we would feed them regular, digestible updates tied to what they actually cared about: fewer delays, faster approvals, less overtime, predictable spend. Then, at renewal time, procurement wouldn't be the only voice in the room. The people who felt the improvement would be asking to keep us. I wrote it up, built the workflow, mocked up the reporting, even drafted the comms templates. I presented it in our team meeting. My boss Helen nodded, asked thoughtful questions, told me to refine the rollout plan, and said she wanted to bring it up to leadership. I left that meeting feeling light, like I'd finally made something that mattered. 2 weeks later, we had a company-wide town hall. The CEO stood on the stage, smiling the way CEOs do when they've been coached to look warm. Camden Rusk stood behind him, holding a mic like it belonged there. And then Camden said in that smooth voice that sounded like he was always on the verge of laughing at a private joke, "One of the things I'm most excited about is a new retention initiative we're launching, our Stakeholder Map program. It's going to redefine how we keep clients delighted and engaged." I sat in the audience, my hands cold around a paper cup of coffee, and watched my idea roll out of his mouth like it had been living there all along. No mention of my name, no mention of Helen's team, no mention of where it came from. Just Camden, shining in the stage lights, giving my work as a gift to the entire company. I leaned toward Helen afterward and whispered, "Did you tell him I built that?" Helen's expression tightened at the corners, the way it did when she was trying to keep her face neutral. "I forwarded your deck," she said quietly, "to the leadership thread. Camden must have picked it up, like it was a coin on the sidewalk. That was the first time. The second time was worse because I was ready for it, and it still happened. I'd built a competitive analysis showing we were vulnerable in one specific vertical. I'd found the gap, identified the competitor's weakness, and suggested a partnership play that would let us leapfrog without spending on product development. I brought it to Helen. She praised the work. She said she'd be careful with distribution. A week later, I opened my email to a message from Camden. "Great work on the vertical strategy. Let's connect. I want to hear your thinking." For a single suspended moment, I felt hope. He knew it was mine. He was reaching out. Then the meeting happened. Camden sat across from me in a conference room that smelled faintly like expensive cologne and lemon cleaner. He smiled. He asked me to explain. I did, because I thought that was what you did when someone senior took interest. I laid out the analysis. I walked him through the play. Camden nodded along like he was approving a restaurant recommendation. Then he said, "Perfect. This is aligned with what I've been thinking." What I've been thinking? He asked me to send him the supporting data for his notes. 3 days after that, the CEO sent out a company-wide email, excited to announce we were exploring a strategic partnership in that vertical, thanks to Camden's insight into the market. I didn't even bother asking Helen this time. I could see it in her eyes. She hated it, but she couldn't stop it. Camden Rusk was a gravitational force. Ideas orbited him. Credit collapsed into him. There's a particular kind of helplessness that comes from watching your work be absorbed like that, and it doesn't feel like dramatic villainy. It feels like you're being slowly erased, like you're writing your name on the sand at low tide and the water keeps coming. I tried what people suggest when they don't understand the kind of person you're dealing with. I tried being louder in meetings. Camden spoke over me. I tried documenting my work. Camden's name ended up on the summary. I tried going around him. People warned me, gently, as if warning me about a live wire. He's close with the CEO. He's protected. He's tricky. He's not someone you want to get on the wrong side of. I started to notice something else too, something that turned my frustration into a colder, clearer emotion. Camden didn't steal ideas because he needed them. He stole them because it was how he fed himself. He didn't build. He consumed, and the people around him, my coworkers, other managers, even directors, had adapted the way people do in the presence of a predator. They learned to offer him things, to keep him satisfied, to keep him from noticing them. I didn't want to live like that, but I also wasn't in a position to quit. My father's health had been declining for a year. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the slow, expensive kind of decline that comes with chronic conditions and insurance plans that always seem to cover less than you need. I helped my mother with bills. I covered prescriptions, I booked appointments. I paid for a home health aide 2 afternoons a week so my mother could sleep. My job at Orem Meridian wasn't just a career, it was oxygen. So I did what a lot of people do when they can't fight openly. I got quiet. I started watching. Camden had patterns. He liked big, glossy ideas with names that sounded like they belonged in a keynote. Catalyst, Launchpad, Project Horizon. He liked initiatives that could be summarized in one line, then applauded. He didn't like details. He didn't like caveats. He didn't like risk disclosures. He liked the kind of plans that looked inevitable. He also liked stealing in a particular way. He didn't snatch something straight out of your hands. He preferred you to offer it. He liked the performance of discovery. He liked being the person who found the brilliance and recognized it. He would ask questions in meetings, leading questions, designed to make you reveal something useful. Then he'd repeat your words later as if they'd arrived to him in the shower. He'd send curious emails. He'd pick your brain. He'd compliment you in a way that made you relax. Then he'd take whatever he wanted. I realized that if I wanted to survive him, I had to stop treating him like a colleague and start treating him like a system. Systems could be influenced. Systems could be nudged. Systems could be trapped. The thought arrived in me one night while I was making tea, standing in my small apartment kitchen with the lights low, listening to my phone buzz with another message from my mother about my father's new medication. I stared at the tea bag steeping in a mug, watched the water turn darker, and I thought, what if I stopped trying to protect my work? What if I gave Camden exactly what he wanted? Not a decoy, not a fake idea that would expose me if anyone looked closely. Not a lie, not anything illegal, something real, something dazzling, something that, on the surface, looked like the best initiative Aurum Meridian had ever seen, and something that contained, deep inside it, a dependency so fragile it would crack the moment anyone tried to build the thing in real life. Not because the proposal was fraudulent, because the proposal was honest, in the places Camden would never read. The next morning, I came into the office with that thought tucked into me like a secret, and I began to build the Trojan horse. The opportunity presented itself faster than I expected. Aurum Meridian was chasing an expansion into municipal contracts, cities, counties, public infrastructure procurement, big budgets, long contracts, the kind of stable revenue investors loved. The CEO wanted it badly because it meant we could tell Wall Street we were diversifying beyond private enterprise, but municipal procurement was different. It was slow. It was regulated. It required a kind of patience our leadership team did not possess. We had one foot in the door already with a mid-sized city in the Midwest, but the contract was small, more of a pilot than a commitment. The CEO wanted to turn it into a national initiative. He wanted to be able to say, "We've cracked public procurement." That's how Project Keystone was born. The name came from Camden, of course. It was announced in an all-hands email, written in that glossy style. Aurum Meridian would revolutionize municipal purchasing, creating savings for taxpayers and efficiency for governments. I read the email at my desk and almost laughed. I'd read enough municipal regs to know this was not a world you revolutionized. It was a world you navigated carefully, like a room full of tripwires. Helen called me into her office later that day. She closed the door, which meant she wanted to speak freely. "The CEO wants a proposal," she said, rubbing her forehead. "A real one, something the board can greenlight. Camden's pushing hard, but he doesn't have the details." I kept my face neutral. "What kind of details?" Helen let out a breath. "The boring ones. Compliance, procurement cycles, legal frameworks. They want to move quickly. I'm worried they'll step into something they don't understand." I looked at her and I saw fatigue there. Helen was good at her job. She cared. But she was also trying to survive the politics of a place where Camden could rewrite reality. I could have said, "Don't worry, I'll protect us." I could have tried to build a cautious proposal with clear guardrails, something that would keep the company safe, but Camden would steal it. He would remove the guardrails, he would push it through, and when something went wrong, people like Helen and me would be blamed for not executing. I needed a different outcome, so I nodded slowly and said, "I can put together a proposal." Helen's shoulders loosened. "Thank you, truly. And Maya." She hesitated. "Be careful with Camden. He's already circling." I offered a small smile. "I know." That afternoon, I started drafting. On the surface, the proposal would be irresistible. It would speak the language. Leadership loved, scale, margin, defensibility, narrative. It would promise the kind of transformation that made board members lean forward. Underneath, in the technical appendices, it would contain a single dependency, a procurement mechanism that had recently been changed, not repealed entirely, not a dramatic shift, but altered in a way that mattered. The kind of change that would slip past anyone reading at a glance. Here's the thing about public procurement. There are shortcuts and there are long roads, and a lot of the shortcuts are not actually shortcuts. They're specific pathways with narrow conditions. If you meet the conditions, you can move quickly. If you don't, you can't, and no amount of corporate confidence can change that. There was a particular pathway, one Aurum Meridian had been eyeing, that allowed municipalities to piggyback on existing cooperative purchasing agreements. It was a way to avoid lengthy bidding processes by joining a broader consortium contract already competitively bid. It was legal and common, and it was exactly the kind of mechanism a company like ours could use to scale quickly. The catch was that a recent guidance update had tightened the requirements for how technology vendors could be included in those cooperative agreements. Specifically, it required a certification process tied to data governance and auditability, something Meridian's platform could likely meet eventually, but not quickly, and not without engineering work we hadn't budgeted. If you read the new guidance, it was clear. You could not simply slide in and sell. You had to pass the certification first. If you read the old guidance, you might think you could. And if you were Camden Rusk, you wouldn't read either. You'd read the first 2 pages of a deck, then decide the rest was execution. So I built a proposal that highlighted the cooperative purchasing strategy as the Keystone lever. I wrote in bold on a slide, "Fast path to scale, cooperative procurement." I used language that sounded confident, the way leadership liked. By leveraging cooperative agreements, Meridian can accelerate municipal adoption from 18-month cycles to 60 to 90 days. It was true, under the right conditions. Then, deep in the appendix, buried under compliance notes and risk matrices, I included a single line that would be my shield. Assumes completion of required third-party certification under updated cooperative data governance guidance, effective Q3. I didn't hide it. I didn't lie. I didn't fabricate data. I explicitly stated the dependency, but I also knew Camden would rip the proposal out of my hands and strip it down. He would take the glossy core and throw away the caveats like packaging. That's what made it legal. That's what made it morally gray. I wasn't sabotaging the company. I was exposing the truth about the kind of people who ran it. I spent 3 days making the proposal beautiful, not just good, beautiful. I built financial models with clean assumptions. I included case studies from peer cities. I designed a timeline that looked aggressive but plausible if the cooperative path worked. I included a staffing plan that made it seem we could do this without major hires. Another thing leadership loved. I crafted the narrative the way Camden would. Municipal contracts as sticky revenue, taxpayer impact, media-friendly wins. I even wrote suggested talking points for the CEO, the kind of lines that sounded like they belonged in a press release. And through it all, I kept my face calm, helpful, kind. On the 4th day, I emailed the draft to Helen, copying Camden, because Helen had asked me to share it with the leadership thread. I wrote the email like I was grateful for the opportunity. Excited to share this initial draft for Project Keystone, happy to refine based on feedback. Then I attached the deck. Full version, appendices included. Within an hour, Camden replied, "Fantastic work, Maya. Exactly the kind of thinking we need. Let's discuss." The email was short, but I could feel it. His teeth. The next morning, Camden pulled me into a conference room, one of the smaller ones, with a wall-mounted screen and a table that was slightly too narrow, like they'd designed it to keep people close. He was already there when I arrived, standing by the screen. The deck was open. He smiled like we were friends. "Maya, this is impressive." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. It was impressive. That was the point. Camden clicked through the slides, nodding at the glossy parts. "This cooperative procurement angle," he said, tapping the screen with a finger. "That's the unlock. That's what I've been saying." I kept my expression neutral. "It's a strong lever if we align with the updated requirements." Camden waved a hand as if brushing away a fly. Yes, details. But the story is right. The board will love this." He turned to me, eyes bright. "I want to present this to the board strategy committee next week." There it was, the familiar pattern. He wasn't asking, he was claiming. I softened my face. I let my voice be warm. "Of course. I'm happy to support." Camden's smile widened. He liked that. He liked when people made it easy. "Great. I'll need you on standby in case there are technical questions." "Absolutely," I said. He clicked to the financials. "These numbers, where did you get the adoption assumptions?" "I modeled them off cooperative consortium adoption rates in similar categories," I said. "I can walk you through the sources if you'd like." "Not necessary," Camden said quickly. "We don't need to bog them down." He clicked again. flipping to a slide that was, intentionally, my favorite. A clean diagram showing how Orem Meridian would integrate into municipal purchasing workflows without causing disruption. It looked elegant. It looked inevitable. Camden leaned back. "This is going to be big." I nodded. "I hope so." He didn't ask me any more about the appendices. He didn't ask about legal. He didn't ask about certification. He didn't ask about the assumptions under the assumptions. He was a man choosing to drink from the top of a cup because he liked the taste of foam. When the meeting ended, Camden walked out with the deck in his possession. He didn't even pretend to leave a copy. He just took it. At my desk, I opened my notes and wrote a summary of the conversation. Not emotional, not accusatory, just a factual recap. Camden intends to present the draft to the board committee. I offered support. I mentioned updated requirements. He dismissed details. Then I emailed that recap to Helen. Quick summary of my conversation with Camden regarding Keystone. He's planning to present next week. I flagged the need to align with updated cooperative requirements. He's focusing on the high-level narrative. Let me know how you'd like me to support. Helen replied with a single line. "Thanks, Maya." But the thanks carried weight. It meant she understood what I was doing, even if she couldn't say it. Over the next week, I did something that surprised even me. I helped Camden, not in the way you might think. I didn't rescue him. I didn't patch the flaw. I didn't try to control his behavior. I simply became his perfect assistant. When he asked for a source, I provided it. When he asked for a slide tweak, I did it. When he asked for a cleaner diagram, I delivered. When he asked for a way to make this feel more inevitable, I gave him language that sounded like destiny. And every time I sent him anything, I included the full deck, appendices and all, because I wanted there to be no question later. He had the information. He chose not to hold it. On the day of the board committee meeting, Camden sent me a message. "Join the call. Stay quiet unless I ask." "Of course," I wrote back. The call began at 8 a.m. sharp. I sat in. A small conference room with my laptop, camera on, smile gentle. The board strategy committee members appeared one by one in neat rectangles, wealthy faces, expensive backgrounds. The CEO, Jonah Price, sat at the center, looking energized. Camden appeared in his own rectangle, wearing a suit that fit like it had been tailored to his ego. "Good morning," he said, voice warm. "I'm excited to share something transformative." He launched into the deck like it was his. "My team and I have been developing an initiative called Project Keystone," he said, without mentioning any names. "It's our path into municipal procurement at scale." He clicked through slides. He told the story beautifully because I had built it to be told that way. He used my phrases. He used my structure. He used the talking points I'd written for the CEO, and the CEO smiled like he'd authored them. The board members leaned in. They asked questions about margin. Camden answered with my numbers. They asked about timeline. Camden answered with my timeline. They asked briefly about risk. Camden smiled. "We've done deep diligence on compliance. We've mapped the pathways. The key unlock is cooperative procurement, leveraging existing consortium agreements to accelerate adoption." A board member with silver hair and a watch that caught the light said, "How certain are we that cooperative procurement will accept our platform without extended certification delays?" My heartbeat slowed, not sped up. This was the moment I'd been building toward, not the collapse yet, but the first crack. Camden didn't look at me. He didn't ask for help. He waved a hand again, the fly swatter motion. "We've reviewed the guidance, we're comfortable. It's an execution detail, not a strategic blocker." I held my smile. I kept my posture relaxed. I didn't jump in. I didn't contradict him. I didn't embarrass him. I stayed quiet unless asked. The board member nodded slowly, not fully convinced, but the momentum was on Camden's side. Momentum is a powerful thing in boardrooms. It makes people believe. The committee approved moving forward to full board consideration. Jonah Price thanked Camden publicly. "This is exactly the kind of thinking that will take us into our next phase," he said. Camden smiled like he'd been given an award. The call ended. Camden messaged me immediately afterward. Great job. They loved it. Let's prep for full board. Happy to, I replied, and I meant it in the same way a surgeon might mean they're happy to sterilize instruments. Over the next 2 weeks, everything accelerated. Project Keystone became the company's obsession. Slack channels lit up. Leadership wanted updates. The CEO talked about it in interviews. People started acting like it was already happening, like the mere act of talking about it made it real. Camden walked through the halls like he was taller. I watched him carefully, the way you watch someone carry something fragile without realizing it's fragile. I continued to be helpful. I continued to smile. I continued to provide whatever he asked for, always with the same warm tone. But I also did one more thing. I quietly reached out to Aurum Meridian's legal counsel, the internal compliance lead named Soren Patel, who had once helped me interpret a vendor privacy clause. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I didn't frame it as sabotage. I framed it as diligence. "Hi, Soren," I wrote. "I'm supporting leadership on Project Keystone and want to ensure our understanding of cooperative procurement guidance is aligned with the latest updates. Can you confirm whether the updated cooperative data governance guidance, effective Q3, requires third-party certification prior to being added to consortium agreements?" It was a simple question. A responsible question. Soren replied the next day. "Yes. Under the updated guidance, technology vendors must complete certification prior to inclusion in cooperative purchasing agreements, with a typical lead time of 4 to 6 months depending on audit readiness." I thanked him. I forwarded the message to Helen with a short note, "FYI for Keystone timelines." Then I forwarded it to Camden too, wrapped in kindness. "Hey Camden, quick compliance detail from Soren. Updated cooperative guidance requires third-party certification prior to inclusion. Typical lead time 4 to 6 months depending on audit readiness. Flagging for timeline alignment. Let me know if you want me to coordinate a prep work stream." Camden responded within minutes. "Thanks. We'll handle." We'll handle. He didn't ask me to coordinate. He didn't ask to adjust the deck. He didn't ask to update the timeline. He acknowledged it just enough that it couldn't be said he hadn't been told, and that was the second shield sliding into place. The full board meeting happened on a Thursday. Camden presented again, bigger this time, more polished, more theatrical. The board approved an initial budget allocation, a multi-million-dollar investment in a municipal sales team, integration work, and marketing. The CEO sent out an all-hands announcement immediately after. "Project Keystone is greenlit," he wrote. "This is a major milestone." Camden's name was everywhere. He was credited as the architect, the visionary, the driver. Helen didn't correct it. No one did. I felt oddly calm. Not because it didn't matter. It did. It still hurt in that old familiar way, but something else was stronger now. Certainty, because the ball was rolling and the track Camden had chosen was about to end. The first month after Greenlight was the honeymoon phase. Camden convened meetings. He assigned work streams. He used the language of collaboration without actually collaborating. He promised quick wins. He pushed teams to move faster than was reasonable. And because people wanted to be associated with the big shiny thing, they complied. They stayed late. They responded instantly. They acted like urgency was proof of value. Meanwhile, the certification issue sat there like a locked door. At first, Camden tried to ignore it. That was his pattern. If a problem didn't fit his narrative, he treated it like background noise. But municipal procurement doesn't care about narrative. A key consortium partner, one we needed to access multiple cities quickly, asked for our certification paperwork before scheduling onboarding. The email went to Camden. He forwarded it to a program manager with a single line, "Get this done." The program manager replied politely that certification required an audit process and documentation Aurum Meridian didn't yet have ready. It would take months. Camden called an emergency meeting. I was invited, of course, because when reality shows up, people like Camden look around for someone else to blame. The meeting was in a large conference room with a whiteboard wall, a long table, and too many people. Camden sat at the head like a judge. The program manager sat near the middle, looking tense. Engineering leads dialed in. Legal dialed in. Camden opened with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Okay," he said. "We have a blocker. That's fine, we solve blockers. He looked at the program manager. Why are we hearing that certification takes months? This should be straightforward. The program manager swallowed. It's not just paperwork. It's a third-party audit. They require evidence of data governance controls, retention policies, audit logs, incident response procedures. Camden held up a hand. Right, but we have those. A legal counsel cleared their throat. We have some elements, but not in the format required by the cooperative guidance, and some controls are still in development. Camden's jaw tightened. How did we not know this earlier? Silence, heavy as wet fabric. I kept my face composed. I looked down briefly like I was taking notes, but really I was giving everyone else the space to speak first. I had learned that if you jump too quickly, you become the target. Camden's eyes scanned the room, landing on people like spotlights. We can't wait 6 months, he said. The board expects movement. Jonah expects movement. He leaned forward. I want options. Engineering said they could accelerate certain controls, but it would require reprioritizing other projects. Legal said we could not bypass certification if we wanted to use cooperative procurement. The program manager said we could pursue direct bids instead, but those would take 12 to 18 months. Camden's face darkened. So our fast path is not fast. The words came out bitter. This was the pivot, not the implosion yet. The moment he realized the thing he'd stolen had teeth, the moment he understood he wasn't holding a trophy, he was holding a live animal, he turned slightly, eyes narrowing, and for the first time in weeks he looked directly at me. Maya, he said, voice controlled, you worked on the proposal. Why wasn't this more clear? I let my expression soften with concern. Helpful. Kind. The way you look when you're genuinely invested in solving the problem, not winning. It was flagged, I said gently, in the assumptions and the compliance appendix, and I forwarded Soren's note about the updated guidance before the full board. Camden's nostrils flared, but the timeline was contingent on the cooperative path, I said, which is contingent on certification lead time. We can adjust the plan now that we have more concrete audit estimates. I offered a solution like a bomb. We can stand up a parallel track, start certification immediately, and in the meantime pursue a small number of direct bids in cities with shorter cycles. It won't be as fast as the cooperative lever, but it creates momentum. Camden stared at me, the room watching him. He couldn't lash out without looking unstable. He couldn't accuse me without revealing he hadn't read what he'd presented as his own. So he did what people like Camden do when cornered. He pivoted to anger at the situation, not the person. Fine, he snapped. Fine. We adjust. We move. The meeting ended with frantic action items. Camden assigned teams. He demanded weekly updates. He scheduled a follow-up with the consortium partner and promised we would have certification underway immediately. Afterward, as people filed out, Helen touched my elbow. Her eyes met mine. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her gaze said, I see it. In the weeks that followed, Camden's world narrowed. Project Keystone had been sold to the board as a fast win. Now it was becoming a slow grind. The kind of grind Camden couldn't survive because grinding required humility. It required attention to detail. It required admitting that systems existed outside his control. Every week, the board asked for progress updates. The CEO asked for progress updates. Investor relations asked for talking points. Camden responded with confidence at first. Certification is underway, he'd say. We're aligning with audit requirements. We're on track. But audits don't care what you say. They care what you can prove. The certification process uncovered gaps Aurum Meridian had ignored for years. Data retention policies that weren't standardized, audit logs that weren't easily extractable, vendor access controls that weren't documented, incident response plans that existed in theory but hadn't been tested. Fixing those gaps required engineering work, legal review, documentation, and time. Time was the one resource Camden didn't have. He started to unravel in small ways. He grew sharper in meetings. He sent late-night emails. He snapped at program managers. He blamed execution teams for moving too slowly. He demanded shortcuts that didn't exist, and through it all, I stayed consistent. I was calm, I was helpful, I offered solutions, I provided documentation. I summarized meetings with gentle professionalism. I made sure that every time I flagged a risk or a dependency, it was in writing and it was phrased as support, flagging for visibility. Happy to help align. Let me know how I can support this workstream. I never said, I told you so. I didn't need to. The second month post-Greenlight was when the money started to bleed. Orem Meridian had hired a small municipal sales team based on the expectation of quick cooperative wins. Those new hires sat in onboarding sessions, eager and ready, while Camden scrambled to give them something to sell. We spent on marketing materials, glossy brochures, a revamped website section, a PR firm to pitch stories about saving taxpayers millions. We booked conference sponsorships. We paid for booth space. We printed banners. All of it was predicated on the idea that we could actually sell. But the consortium partner wouldn't let us in the door without certification, and direct bids were slow. So the municipal sales team began to idle. Idle headcount is one of the fastest ways to make a CFO furious. People cost money even when they're doing nothing, especially in a company that measures everything. By month 3, the CFO requested a private board update. The tone changed. One afternoon, Helen called me. Into her office again. Her face was pale with stress. Jonah's furious, she said quietly. The CFO is asking hard questions. Camden's been promising timelines he can't meet. I sat down, hands folded in my lap. What does Jonah want? Helen hesitated. He wants someone to blame, but he can't blame the guidance. He can't blame the board. So he'll blame execution, I finished softly. Helen nodded, eyes tired. Camden's trying to shift it onto our division. I felt a cold clarity settle in me, the kind that feels like stepping onto a solid floor after walking through fog. Do we have documentation? I asked. Helen's gaze sharpened. We do. I didn't say the next part out loud, that I had been building that documentation like a scaffold around my future self, but Helen knew. She opened a folder on her desk and slid it toward me. Inside were printouts of emails, my summaries, my forwarded compliance notes, my flagged dependencies, time-stamped proof that the risk had been communicated, that the contingency had been stated. Helen exhaled. I don't want to destroy him, she said, but I can't let him destroy us. I looked at her with something like gratitude. We won't, I said. We'll just be accurate. Accuracy is a quiet weapon. The next week, Jonah Price called a Keystone alignment meeting with key leaders, Camden, Helen, the CFO, legal, engineering, and me. I was included, which told me something. Camden was either trying to keep me close, or Jonah wanted the person who had done the groundwork in the room. The meeting was in the executive conference room, bigger, darker, with a long polished table and a view of the city like a promise. Jonah sat at the head, hands clasped, jaw tight. Camden sat 2 seats away, posture rigid, eyes bright with that brittle energy that comes from being cornered. Jonah began without pleasantries. I need to understand why the board approved a plan predicated on timelines we can't meet. Camden's voice was smooth, but I could hear strain beneath it. We have been executing aggressively. The certification process is more complex than anticipated, but we're solving. The CFO cut in. We've spent millions on a go-to-market motion that has no revenue path until certification clears. Our burn increased. Our forecast is impacted. This is not a small delay. Jonah's eyes pinned Camden. Did we know about this certification dependency when we presented? Camden's gaze flicked toward me for half a second. I kept my expression open and calm, like I was rooting for everyone to succeed. Camden said carefully, We were aware of compliance considerations. Jonah's voice sharpened. Was the board made explicitly aware that cooperative procurement required third-party certification with a likely 4 to 6 month lead time? Camden hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Because if he said no, he would be admitting he hadn't done diligence. If he said yes, the next question would be, why did he promise 60 to 90 days? He chose a middle path. The details were in the supporting materials, he said, but the assumption was that certification could be accelerated. The CFO looked at legal. Can certification be accelerated? Legal shook their head. Not beyond certain limits. There are external auditor schedules and evidence requirements. Jonah leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. So the 60 to 90-day timeline was unrealistic. Camden's voice tightened. It was aspirational. Aspirational. Another word that means not true, but we hoped. Jonah's gaze moved around the room. Who built the proposal? Camden opened his mouth, and for the first time I saw him calculate. If he claimed it fully, he owned the flaw. If he blamed someone else, he revealed his theft. He said, "It was a collaborative effort." Jonah turned to Helen. "Helen?" Helen's voice was steady. "My team supported the analysis and drafted the detailed materials. Camden presented the strategy." Jonah's eyes shifted to me. "Maya, you worked on this?" I nodded gently. "Yes. I drafted the deck and the appendices. The certification dependency was noted in the assumptions section, and I forwarded compliance confirmation from Soren Patel prior to the full board. I didn't say it with triumph. I said it like a responsible adult explaining a timeline." Jonah held my gaze. "Do you have those emails?" Helen slid a folder forward on the table. "Yes." Jonah opened it. He flipped through, face unreadable. Camden's hands tightened on the table edge, knuckles whitening. For a long moment, the only sound was paper, the soft, dry whisper of pages turning. It was the sound of a narrative unraveling. Jonah set the folder down. He looked at Camden. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Did you present a timeline to the board that contradicted the documented dependency?" Camden's smile appeared, thin, desperate. "Jonah, we needed a compelling story to get investment. The execution teams assured me we could move quickly if we prioritized." The CFO's voice was flat. "Engineering did not assure that." Engineering shook their head. "We flagged the lead times." Camden's eyes flashed. "Everyone flags things. If we let flags stop us, we'd never do anything." Jonah's tone changed then. It lowered. It became dangerous, not because it was loud, but because it was controlled. "This isn't about flags," Jonah said. "This is about presenting assumptions as certainty to get a green light." Camden's face went still. Jonah continued, "We don't greenlight fairy tales. We greenlight strategies." The room was silent. I felt my pulse slow, the way it does when you realize the storm has reached its center. Camden tried one more time. "I can fix this," he said. "Give me 60 days. We'll have certification evidence. We'll show traction through direct bids. Jonah held up a hand. "No." One word. A door closing. Jonah turned to the CFO. "Freeze discretionary Keystone spend. Pause marketing. Reassess headcount allocation." Then he looked at Helen. "Helen, I want you to take operational control of Keystone effective immediately. I want accurate timelines. I want realistic pathways. And I want weekly updates that reflect reality." Helen's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "Understood." Jonah looked at Camden last. "Camden," he said, voice calm, "you will transition oversight. We'll discuss your role separately." Camden's face tightened, but he forced a smile. "Of course," he said. "Whatever is best for the company." Whatever is best for the company. It sounded noble. But it sounded to me like someone trying to keep their dignity as the floor falls away. After the meeting, Camden approached me in the hallway. The executive floor was quiet, carpeted, muffling footsteps. The air smelled like polished wood and expensive coffee. Camden's smile was gone. In its place was something raw. "You set me up," he hissed softly. I blinked slowly, as if surprised by the accusation. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, my voice gentle. "You knew," he said. "You knew certification would kill the timeline." "I knew it was a dependency," I said calmly. "That's why it was documented." Camden's eyes narrowed. "You buried it." I tilted my head slightly, as if considering. It was in the assumption section and the compliance appendix, and I emailed you Soren's confirmation. His jaw clenched. He looked around as if searching for witnesses. There were none, just quiet hallways and glass offices. "You're playing innocent," he said. I kept my expression soft. "I'm trying to be helpful," I said. "We all want Keystone to succeed." He stared at me, breathing hard, then leaned closer. "Do you know what you've done?" he whispered. I met his eyes. "I've documented reality," I said. "That's my job." Camden's face twisted, and for a moment I thought he might say something truly reckless. But then he caught himself. He straightened his suit. Jacket, smoothing it like armor. "This isn't over," he said. I offered a small, sympathetic smile. "I hope it works out," I said, "and I meant it in the way you mean you hope a hurricane weakens before it hits shore. You can hope. But you can't pretend you didn't see it coming." Camden was removed from Keystone within a week. The company didn't announce it like a firing. They never do. They announced it like a realignment. Camden would focus on strategic partnerships, while Helen's group operationalized execution, but everyone understood what it meant. In a place like Aurum Meridian, being reassigned away from the CEO's favorite initiative was a demotion in everything but title. Camden stopped walking through the halls like he was taller. He started walking fast, head down, like he didn't want to be stopped. He tried to salvage his image. He sent emails praising Helen's leadership. He complimented teams publicly. He started using words like humility and learning in meetings, as if he could manufacture a new persona out of language. But the board didn't care about persona. They cared about results, and they cared about trust. Trust is the true currency, and Camden's account was overdrawn. As Helen took control, Keystone became what it should have been from the start. A disciplined, realistic program. Certification work streams were properly funded. Engineering built controls. Legal documented policies. The municipal sales team shifted to smaller direct bids to keep them engaged while the cooperative pathway matured. It was slower, but it was real. And because it was real, it eventually produced revenue. Not in 60 days. Not in 90. But within 8 months, we landed a meaningful municipal contract through direct bid. Then, after certification cleared, the cooperative consortium opened its doors, and expansion became possible. The irony was almost unbearable. The initiative succeeded, just not the way Camden had promised. It succeeded because people like Helen and me did the work Camden had never wanted to do. One evening, months later, I was packing up my desk when Helen appeared at the entrance to my pod. Her face looked different, less strained, more certain. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I nodded and followed her into her office. She closed the door, then gestured for me to sit. "I owe you," she said. I shook my head. "You don't." Helen's eyes softened. "You do good work, Maya, and you've been steady through all of this." I waited, not trusting hope too quickly. Helen took a breath. "I recommended you for a promotion. Senior strategy lead." And Jonah agreed. For a moment I didn't speak. The words landed in me slowly, like snow. "Thank you," I said quietly. Helen nodded. "There's more. Jonah asked me something after Camden was moved off Keystone." She hesitated, then gave a small, wry smile. "He asked me why we'd been letting Camden find everyone else's ideas." I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. "What did you say?" "I said it's hard to fight gravity," Helen said. "But gravity isn't magic, it's just a force. And forces can be managed." She looked at me. "You managed it." I swallowed. "I just documented." Helen's smile was faint. "You did more than that," she said. "You understood the game, and you didn't let it change who you are." I left her office that night and walked out into the city air, feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because Camden had fallen, not because I'd won, but because I hadn't been erased. A week after my promotion went through, Camden finally cornered me again. It happened in the kitchen area on our floor, near the fancy espresso machine that always broke when people needed it most. I was waiting for hot water to boil for tea, watching the tiny bubbles form at the bottom of the kettle. Camden stepped in, silent as a shadow. His suit still looked expensive, but something about him looked smaller, like he'd been pressed. "Congratulations," he said, voice flat. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone polite. He stared at the kettle like it offended him. "You think you're clever," he said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Camden continued, quieter now. "You could have warned me." I turned my head slightly. "I did," I said gently. "I emailed you." His jaw tightened. "You know what I mean." I let my expression soften again, the same calm mask. "I don't," I said. "I warned you about the dependency. You chose the story you wanted to tell." Camden's eyes flashed. "You wanted me to fail." I paused. I chose my words carefully because this mattered, not just for revenge, but for my own integrity. "I wanted the truth to be visible," I said, "because when the truth stays hidden, people like you keep winning." Camden stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed once, short, bitter. "People like me?" he repeated. "Yes," I said. "People who take credit without carrying responsibility." The kettle clicked off. The silence between us hummed. Camden leaned closer. His voice dropped. "Be careful," he said. "You think you've escaped, but this place, it eats people." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized something that startled me with its simplicity. He was afraid. Not of me specifically, but of what I represented, a person who couldn't be consumed. I poured my tea calmly. The steam rose between us like a veil. "I'll be fine," I said softly. "I read the fine print." Camden's mouth tightened. He turned and walked out, moving fast. I took my tea back to my desk and sat down. Outside, the river moved slowly, reflecting the city lights in trembling lines. I opened my laptop, scanned my inbox, and began working on the next project with a steadiness that felt earned, because the real revenge wasn't Camden's demotion. The real revenge was that I didn't become him. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to smear. I didn't have to break laws or cross lines that would stain my hands forever. I simply built something strong, told the truth inside it, and let the person who stole it reveal what they were when asked to carry it. A Trojan horse doesn't win by exploding. It wins by being welcomed. And once the gates are opened, the city does the rest. The week after my promotion, the building felt the same in all the ways that mattered. Glass, badges, the soft hum of air conditioning that never quite stopped, but the way people looked at me had shifted. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. More like they looked twice. In a place like Orem Meridian, attention is a weather system. You don't notice it until it changes, and then suddenly you're aware of which way it's blowing. Camden Rusk, meanwhile, was having his own climate change. He still had his title. He still had the corner office on the executive floor. He still had the crisp suit jackets and the smooth voice and the polished little laugh. But he didn't have the one thing that had made him dangerous. He didn't have Jonah's unquestioning trust anymore. And once that cracks, everything that was held together by confidence starts to show seams. It started small. Camden stopped being copied on certain threads. He stopped being invited to the tight meetings, the ones that mattered. People began to schedule around him instead of with him. His calendar had white space in it, which in that world is the most humiliating thing of all. A week after he cornered me in the kitchen, an email went out from Investor Relations. The next earnings call would include a brief update on Project Keystone. Helen would be the one delivering it, not Camden. It was a simple detail, a small line in an agenda, but it told a story. And Camden understood stories. He tried to rewrite it. He started showing up in Keystone meetings again, uninvited, sitting quietly at the edge of the table like a concerned advisor. He would nod at the right moments. He would ask questions that sounded supportive. He would drop phrases like, "When we designed this," and "the original strategy was," as if he could stitch himself back into the narrative with sheer repetition. I watched him do it and felt something unexpected. Not triumph, but a kind of tired sorrow. Camden wasn't a builder. He was a performer, and performers panic when they sense the audience losing interest. The first real jolt came in the form of a board request. The strategy committee wanted a Keystone post-mortem, not a blame session, not officially. They framed it as lessons learned and process refinement. But everyone in leadership knew what it really meant. The board wanted to understand how a fast path plan had been greenlit without the dependency being treated like a headline. In other words, they wanted to understand how Camden had been allowed to sell them a story. Helen told me about it in her office, door closed, voice low. "They're asking for documentation," she said. "Timeline of decisions. What was known when?" I nodded once. "We have it." Helen's eyes held mine. "I know." She didn't sound relieved. She sounded resigned, like someone preparing to do a necessary, unpleasant thing. "Are you okay with me including your emails?" she asked. It was a question, but it was also a courtesy, a recognition that the documentation was my shield, and using it publicly could turn it into a spotlight. I felt that old instinct to shrink, to protect myself by staying invisible. Then I thought of all the times I'd watched Camden pick up other people's work and carry it around like a trophy while the creators stayed silent, hoping silence would keep them safe. Silence hadn't kept us safe. Silence had fed him. So I said gently, "Yes." Helen exhaled. "Okay." The post-mortem meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, 7:30 a.m., before the board members scattered into other calls and flights. It would be virtual but formal. Cameras on, slide deck, precise language. Camden wasn't invited. That was the second jolt. Not just to him, to everyone. Because if Camden could be left out of a board session about his initiative, then the rules everyone assumed were permanent weren't. The morning of the post-mortem, I joined from the same small conference room I'd used months earlier, when Camden told me to stay quiet unless asked. This time, Helen was the presenter. The CFO was on, legal was on, engineering was on, Jonah was on, face calm, eyes sharp. Board members appeared in their neat rectangles, coffee cups, neutral expressions, the soft lighting of wealth and early mornings. Helen began with, exactly what the board wanted, clarity. She walked them through the original proposal, the assumptions, the certification dependency, the decision points, the email thread with Soren's confirmation, the timeline that had been communicated versus the timeline that had been promised. She didn't editorialize. She didn't accuse. She did what I'd promised Jonah we would do. She was accurate. A board member, silver hair, the same watch, asked, why wasn't the dependency elevated to the headline? There was a pause. Not because Helen didn't know the answer, but because naming the answer meant naming a person. Helen kept her voice steady. The supporting materials contained the dependency, she said. However, the timeline communicated in the presentation emphasized the best case path without equal emphasis on the lead time constraint. The board member's eyes narrowed slightly. So the presentation created an impression of certainty where there was conditionality. Yes, Helen said. Jonah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't speak, but his silence had weight. Another board member asked, what changes are being made to prevent a repeat? And that's where Helen did something I hadn't expected. She turned slightly and said, Maya has drafted a governance update for strategic initiatives. My name dropped into the meeting like a pebble into still water. Helen shared a slide I'd built quietly over the past week, while everyone else was still talking about spending freezes and hiring pauses. A new initiative intake process. A required assumptions and dependencies page that had to be presented, not buried. A compliance sign-off checklist. A version-controlled deck repository. A formal attribution line for primary authors and contributors. Nothing dramatic. Nothing punitive. Just structure. The board members nodded slowly. They liked structure. Structure was what prevented expensive surprises. The silver-haired board member said, good. One word, approving, final, and with that, the board moved on, satisfied. But the damage, Camden's damage, had already been done, because the postmortem didn't just reveal a process failure, it revealed a pattern, a culture where story had been allowed to outrun reality. After the meeting, Jonah sent a short email to leadership. Effective immediately, all strategic initiative decks must include the assumptions and dependencies slide in the main body. No exceptions. No exceptions. That meant no one could do what Camden had done again, not without leaving fingerprints. You would think a person like Camden would lie low after that, disappear for a while, wait for the heat to fade, but Camden didn't know how to be small. He tried to come back with a new story. It started as whispers. I heard it from a director in product who stopped by my desk with a careful smile. "Have you heard Camden's pushing something called Project Helios?" she asked. I kept my expression neutral. "No. What is it?" She leaned closer, voice quiet. "Some kind of AI-driven procurement forecasting engine. He's pitching it as the next growth story." I felt a slow, familiar calm move through me. Another shiny thing. Another inevitable initiative. Another attempt to regain his orbit. I nodded, as if mildly interested. "Sounds ambitious." The director's eyes flicked over my face, searching for reaction. People had started doing that now, watching to see if I would flinch, or smile, or reveal some secret satisfaction. I didn't give them anything. I just said, "Let me know if you need anything from strategy." That afternoon, Camden emailed me. The subject line was casual. Quick thought. His message was polished, friendly, and carefully vague. "Maya, hope you're well. I'm exploring an initiative around predictive procurement optimization. Would love your strategic input. Can you share any frameworks you've used for adoption modeling in regulated sectors?" I stared at the email, feeling the shape of the trap he wanted to set. He was trying to pull me back into the old pattern, trying to pick my brain and then reappear with the output as his own. Once, I would have ignored him or responded defensively, but defensiveness was exactly what someone like Camden fed on. It made you look emotional. It made you look like the problem. So I responded with kindness. "Hi, Camden. Happy to share general frameworks. For regulated sectors, we typically model adoption around 1. Compliance lead times, 2. Stakeholder mapping, and 3. Procurement cycle variability. Attached is a high-level template we use. Note: per Jonah's update, ensure your deck includes assumptions and dependencies in the main body. I attached a template. Not my best thinking, not a dazzling initiative, a template, a structure. And then I did one more thing. I CC'd Helen, just lightly, casually, as if it were normal, because that was the new game now, sunlight. Camden replied 5 minutes later. "Thanks." No smiley face, no warmth. He didn't invite me to a meeting. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He'd tasted the difference. The difference was that I wasn't alone anymore, and he knew it. Project Helios still moved forward. Of course it did. Camden wouldn't stop pushing, but without the ability to hide dependencies or control. The narrative alone, his pitch, lost its magic. When he presented a draft to the leadership committee, the first question Jonah asked was simple. "What are the assumptions?" Camden started to gloss, the way he always had. Jonah cut in again. "No," Jonah said calmly. "I mean, what are they, specifically?" The room went quiet. Camden looked around, searching for someone to rescue him with details. There was no one. He hadn't built a team around the idea. He'd tried to build it around himself. He cleared his throat and started listing assumptions in a way that sounded improvised. It was painful to watch, like someone trying to sing without knowing the melody. After the meeting, the rumor traveled fast. Camden got grilled. Jonah wasn't letting him slide anymore. 2 weeks later, Project Helios quietly disappeared. Not killed dramatically, just starved. No resources allocated, no follow-up meetings, no urgency. Camden's orbit shrank again. And then came the part that surprised me. It wasn't Camden's next move. It was mine. One evening in late spring, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was thin with worry. "Your father's numbers were worse. The doctor wanted adjustments, more appointments, more monitoring." I listened, eyes on the river outside my office window, watching the light fade into dusk. When I hung up, I sat for a long time without moving. I had fought for oxygen, for stability, for the ability to keep supporting my family. I had stayed in a company full of glass and politics because I needed what it gave me. But now, after months of tension and maneuvering and careful documentation, I felt something shift. It wasn't just that I'd won a promotion, it was that I'd proven to myself I could survive the game without letting it hollow me out. And once you prove that, you start to notice the cost of staying. The next day, I asked Helen for a meeting. When I entered her office, she smiled faintly. "What's up?" I sat down, hands folded, heart steady. "I want to talk about a leave arrangement," I said, "or a reduced schedule. My dad's health is getting worse." Helen's face softened immediately. "Of course," she said. "We'll figure it out." I hesitated. "There's something else." Helen tilted her head, attentive. "I've been offered a role," I said. "Not here, with a smaller organization, more stability, more control over my time." Helen's eyebrows rose. "You've been approached?" I nodded. "It wasn't planned. It came through someone I worked with on Keystone. They're building an internal governance function, process, compliance integration, strategy ops. The kind of work I've been doing anyway, but without all of this." I didn't say Camden's name. I didn't have to. The air in the room carried it. Helen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "Is that what you want?" I exhaled slowly. "Part of me wants to stay," I admitted, "because leaving feels like letting him win." Helen shook her head gently. "Maya," she said, "he didn't win. You changed the rules." I blinked, surprised by how much those words landed. Helen continued, "You protected yourself. You protected us. And you built process that will outlive him. If you leave, you're not running. You're choosing." Choosing. That was the quiet word that mattered. I had spent so long reacting to Camden, to corporate gravity, to urgent emails and shifting narratives that I had forgotten the sensation of choosing freely. Helen reached across her desk and rested her hand lightly on the folder that held all our Keystone documentation, as if it were a weight. "I can counter," she said. "I can offer you something, more company, flexibility, a clearer path." I believed her. Helen was loyal in the ways that mattered, but I also knew Aurum Meridian would always have Camden-shaped shadows, even if Camden himself eventually left. Places like this didn't change overnight. Sometimes they didn't change at all. And my father's time was not an elastic resource, so I said softly, "I'm leaning toward taking it." Helen's eyes stayed on mine. She nodded once. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not for staying, for knowing when to go." That night I walked home slower than usual. The city air was warm. The streetlights flickered on one by one like a gentle sequence. I thought about Camden and all the energy I had spent trying not to be erased by him, and then, for the first time, I understood the deepest part of the revenge I'd engineered. Camden didn't just lose an initiative. He lost his access to me. He didn't get to siphon my work, my attention, my time, my life. He didn't get to define my story. A week later, I gave notice. Professionally, calmly, no drama. Helen hugged me before I left, briefly, fiercely, the way people do when they don't have the right words. On my last day, I packed my desk into a small box. Notebooks, a mug, a framed photo of my parents when they were younger and smiling without effort. As I stepped into the elevator, the doors almost closed, and then a hand stopped them. Camden. He stepped in, eyes on the floor. The elevator doors shut with a soft thump, sealing us into a small moving room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Camden said, without looking at me, "So you're leaving?" "Yes," I said gently. The elevator hummed upward, or downward. I wasn't paying attention. Camden's voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "You think you're better than this place?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, disguised as observation. I considered, then answered honestly. "I think I want something different," I said. That's all." He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "You'll find it's the same everywhere," he said. I turned my head slightly. "Maybe," I said, "but I'll still be me." That landed between us like a stone. Camden finally looked up. His eyes were tired. For a moment I saw him as something other than a villain, just a man built out of hunger and fear and ambition, chasing approval like it was oxygen, and in that moment I felt the last piece of the revenge settle into place. Not hatred, not gloating, just release. The elevator dinged, the doors opened. I stepped out first, holding my box. Camden didn't follow. He stayed inside as if he couldn't decide whether to rise or descend. I walked away without looking back, and behind me, the doors closed, quiet and final. The next time I heard Camden Rusk's name, it wasn't in a hallway or a kitchen or a meeting where he could smile his way out of trouble. It was in a room he wasn't allowed to enter. I didn't know that at first, of course. I had already left Aurum Meridian. I was already learning the shape of my new life. The softer edges, the quieter mornings, the way my chest didn't tighten every time my inbox refreshed. My new role was with a smaller organization called Northlake Cooperative Systems. Not glamorous, not a platform, just a serious company with serious clients and a reputation built on doing the boring things correctly. I had a modest office with a door that actually closed. My calendar had white space because people believed in focus time. When someone said urgent, they meant it. Rarely, and with context. And when I told my manager I needed Tuesdays blocked for my father's appointments, she didn't blink. "Do what you need," she said. "We'll work around life. We're not curing disease here." It took me a full month to stop waiting for the trap. Even in quiet, I found myself listening for Camden's footsteps, expecting a slick email, a sudden meeting invite with vague subject lines. Quick thought. Sync? Idea. But the quiet held, and slowly my body started to believe it. My father's health didn't improve. Real life doesn't do that for your convenience, but my ability to be present did. I could sit with him on the porch, the evening air warm against our faces, and not be. Secretly counting the minutes until my next call. I could drive my mother to pick up prescriptions without feeling like the world would collapse if I didn't respond to Slack in 10 minutes. The revenge I'd planned had already done its work. Now I was living the part I hadn't dared to imagine, the after. 2 months after I left, Helen texted me. It was a simple message. "Hope you're settling in. Do you have time for a quick call this week?" I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "Yes, anytime." We spoke that Friday afternoon. Helen sounded tired, but lighter than she'd been during Keystone, like the tension had moved out of her shoulders, or at least stopped living there full-time. "How are you?" she asked first. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "Better," I said honestly. "My dad's stable this week. And I sleep." Helen let out a quiet laugh. "God, I remember sleep." Then she paused, and I heard the shift in her voice. The part of her that had called me into her office months ago and closed the door. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. I waited. "The board created a new oversight committee," Helen continued. "Strategic Initiatives Governance. They're formalizing everything. No initiative gets greenlit without compliance sign-off and a dependency review that's presented. Presented, not buried." A warmth spread through me, slow and surprising. "They actually did it." "They did," Helen said. "Your framework was the foundation." I looked out my office window at a line of trees turning softly gold in the afternoon light. "That makes me happy," I said, and I meant it. Not because it validated me, because it meant fewer people would be erased the way I'd nearly been. Helen took a breath. "There's more." Of course there was. "Camden tried to fight it," she said quietly. "Not openly. He can't. But he's scrambling." I stayed silent. I didn't want to sound eager. I didn't want to sound like the villain in someone else's story. Helen continued, voice low. The committee asked for a review of all initiatives Camden sponsored in the last 2 years. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with that old recognition of gravity shifting. "What does that mean?" I asked softly. "It means," Helen said, "they're looking at patterns, promises versus reality, spend versus outcome, who authored what." There was a pause on the line. "Jonah signed off on it," she added. That, more than anything, told me the truth. Camden wasn't just out of favor. He was under a microscope. "How are you doing with all of it?" I asked Helen. Helen's exhale was long. "I'm managing. It's exhausting, but it's also clarifying." Then her voice turned gentler. "Maya, I'm glad you left. I miss you, but I'm glad you're not in the middle of this." "Thank you," I said quietly. "And Helen, be careful." Helen gave a small, dry laugh. "I've learned from the best." We hung up, and for a moment I sat still, letting the information settle. A board-level review wasn't a dramatic execution. It was worse. It was slow, documented, unavoidable. It didn't punish with anger. It punished with truth. Weeks passed, my life filled with different problems, building workflows at Northlake, learning new systems, driving to appointments, trying to convince my father to eat more than toast when his appetite disappeared. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, I got another message from Helen. Just 2 words: "He's out." I stared at my phone, rain tapping the window beside me like a soft metronome. I typed back, "Camden?" Helen replied, "Resigned, effective immediately." Resigned. That's the word companies use when they want the story to sound graceful. But grace doesn't usually happen effective immediately. Grace doesn't usually involve security escorts, calendar wipes, or emails that go out at 6:47 p.m. with carefully crafted lines about pursuing new opportunities. Helen called me that night, voice quiet. "They gave him a choice," she said, "resign or be terminated." I let my breath out slowly. "What happened?" Helen's tone was careful. The review found inconsistencies, initiatives that were sold as one thing and executed as another, timelines that were knowingly unrealistic, costs that were hidden in different budgets to make projections look cleaner. My spine chilled. "That sounds bad," I said. "It's not criminal," Helen said quickly. "Not that, but it's misconduct, misrepresentation, enough to put Jonah in a defensive posture with the board." I closed my eyes, picturing Camden's smile. "So they cut him loose?" "Yes," Helen said. "And Maya—" "What?" Helen hesitated. "He tried to drag you down with him." My eyes opened. "How?" "He implied you misled him, that you buried dependencies, that you gave him bad information." A quiet, almost amused sadness moved through me. "Of course," Helen's voice sharpened. "It didn't work. Your emails, your notes, your forwarded compliance confirmations, everything was time-stamped. Your documentation was the reason the committee understood what was real." I swallowed. "So the thing he used against people was what ended him?" Helen's laugh was small and weary. "Yes." That night, after we hung up, I made tea and sat at my kitchen table. The rain continued, steady and soft. Somewhere. In the building, someone's TV murmured through the walls. I thought about Camden Rusk alone in his office on the executive floor, packing his own box. I imagined him smoothing his suit jacket like armor one last time, and I waited for the rush of satisfaction I thought I would feel. It didn't come. What I felt instead was a kind of quiet emptiness, the way you feel after a storm passes and you realize how much energy you spent bracing. Camden's downfall didn't fix the past. It didn't give me back the credit I'd lost. It didn't erase the nights I'd stared at the ceiling furious and helpless, but it did something subtler. It proved that the universe didn't always reward the thief. Sometimes it simply stopped feeding him. 3 months after Camden left, I received a LinkedIn message. From him, the name alone made my stomach tighten, a reflex, a muscle memory of danger. The message was short. Maya, I hope you're well. I'd like to talk. No agenda, just talk. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it forever. Part of me wanted to respond with something sharp and righteous. Part of me wanted to screenshot it and send it to Helen like a trophy. But trophies were Camden's language, not mine. So I did the most powerful thing I'd learned to do. I chose. I didn't respond. I didn't block him. I didn't report him. I didn't engage. I simply let the message sit there like an unopened door, because the final piece of freedom wasn't watching him fall. It was realizing I didn't have to orbit him at all, not even in victory. A week later, Northlake sent me to a conference. Not a flashy one. No stage lights, no glossy banners, just a practical gathering of procurement and compliance professionals in a hotel with beige carpet and coffee that tasted like cardboard. I sat on a panel about governance and risk frameworks. I spoke calmly about assumptions, dependencies, and the cost of pretending compliance is just paperwork. Afterward, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes approached me. "I liked what you said," she told me. "Most people don't understand how dangerous confidence is when it's disconnected from reality." I smiled. "Thank you." She handed me a business card. "If you ever want to move into advisory work, helping boards build controls so they don't get sold fairy tales, call me." I tucked the card into my pocket, feeling something gentle and unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Possibility. Not ambition that burns, not desperation, just possibility. That night, I called my mother from the hotel room. My father had had a good day. He'd eaten half a bowl of soup. He'd laughed at a story my mother told about a neighbor's dog stealing a loaf of bread. I lay in the hotel bed afterward, the sheets crisp, the air cool, and I thought about the arc of the last year. The Trojan horse wasn't just the proposal. It was my kindness, my calm, my willingness to help while quietly making sure the truth was documented and visible. It was the way I stopped trying to win a shouting match and started building a reality the thief couldn't carry. Camden had depended on chaos, on people being too tired, too intimidated, too busy to track what was true. So I built a world where truth had receipts, and in the end, it wasn't revenge that defeated him. It was accountability, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that simply records. When I finally drifted toward sleep, I imagined a boardroom with a new slide in every deck, sitting there like a calm guard at the gate, not glamorous, not exciting, but strong enough to keep a city safe. And somewhere far away, a man like Camden Rusk would realize the gates weren't opening for him anymore, no matter how charmingly he knocked. A year later, Helen called me on a Sunday morning. It was early enough that the light hadn't fully decided what it wanted to be yet. Soft gray at the edges, the sky still holding onto night like a blanket it wasn't ready to give up. I was in my parents' kitchen, barefoot on cool tile, making oatmeal the way my father liked it now. Thinner than before, almost like soup, with a little honey stirred in so it went down easier. My phone buzzed on the counter. I stared at the name for a moment, then answered quietly so I wouldn't startle my father. "Hey," I said. "Maya," Helen replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I didn't wake you, did I?" "No," I said. "I'm at my parents'. Dad's up." There was a pause. "How is he?" I looked over at him. He sat at the small kitchen table, wrapped in a sweater that used to look oversized on him and now fit like it belonged. His hands were around a mug of tea. He was watching the steam curl upward with an expression that was both peaceful and far away. "He's here," I said softly, "which is more than I let myself hope for last year." Helen exhaled, something warm and quiet. "I'm glad." Then she cleared her throat, the sound that always meant she'd called for a reason, not just to check in. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. I leaned my hip against the counter, lowering my voice automatically. "Okay." "The governance committee?" Helen said. "It's permanent now. Full charter. Board-level oversight." A small warmth spread through me again. "Still?" "Still," Helen confirmed. "And they used your framework as the company standard. It's baked into everything, even product pitches, even M&A discussions. Every deck has to have the dependencies slide. Compliance signs off before anything goes near the board. I closed my eyes briefly, not from exhaustion, just from the strange relief of knowing something solid had been built in the place that used to feel like shifting sand. That's incredible, I said. It is, Helen replied. And Maya, Jonah asked me to pass something on to you. My eyes opened. What? Helen's voice softened. He said, "Tell Maya she saved us a lot of money." I let out a quiet laugh, surprised by the sudden sting behind my eyes. That sounds like him, Helen chuckled. He also said, I should have promoted her sooner. I shook my head slowly, smiling without meaning to. Tell him I'm happy where I am. I will, Helen said. Then she paused. How are you? Really? I thought about my new job at Northlake, the steadiness of it, the way my calendar could hold both work and life without tearing, the way I had stopped flinching at every notification. I'm calmer, I said. Not numb, just calmer. Helen hummed, approving. Good, you deserved calm. We talked a few more minutes, small updates, mutual jokes about corporate buzzwords, the kind of conversation that feels like closing a door gently instead of slamming it. Before she hung up, Helen said, By the way, Camden tried to come back. I froze, oatmeal spoon in my hand. Come back? I repeated. Not to the company, Helen said. To the industry. He's been pitching himself as a strategic advisor and initiative architect. He reached out to a few people, tried to get a role at a partner firm. I felt my stomach tighten, reflexive. Did it work? Helen's tone turned dry. No. I waited. He has a reputation now, Helen said. You can only sell stories until people start keeping receipts. I smiled faintly. Good. Helen's voice softened again. Anyway, I wanted you to know, not because you need to do anything, just because you should know the universe kept doing what it was doing. Thank you, I said quietly. After the call ended, I stood for a moment in the quiet kitchen. My father's spoon clinked gently against his bowl. The sound was small and ordinary and strangely precious. I brought the oatmeal to him and set it down. He looked up at me. His eyes were a little foggier these days, as if the world had a thin veil over it, but when he focused on me, there was still that familiar steadiness beneath. Smells good? He said. Extra honey, I told him. He nodded like that solved everything. I sat across from him with my own mug of tea, hands around the warmth, and for a while we ate in silence. Then my father spoke again, voice quiet. You look different, he said. I blinked. Different how? He considered, the way he always had. Slow, deliberate, not wasting words. Lighter, he said finally, like you're not carrying something heavy all the time. My throat tightened. I didn't realize it showed. He gave a small shrug. It always shows. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I hadn't even noticed. I left, I said softly. I left that job. I know, he said. I used to think if I left, it meant I lost, I admitted. The words felt strange and true and tender. Like walking away meant someone else won. My father's gaze stayed on mine, calm as ever. Who told you that? He asked. I opened my mouth, then closed it. There wasn't one person. There was a whole culture, a whole chorus. My father nodded as if he understood anyway. Listen, he said, lowering his voice like he was sharing something important, something just for me. When you're young, you think winning is staying on the field longer than the other person. I swallowed. And when you get older, he continued, you realize winning is choosing which field you even want to stand on. The words settled into me with a softness that hit harder than anything sharp. I blinked quickly, staring at the steam rising from my tea. My father reached into the pocket of his sweater and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was creased, worn like he'd carried it around for a while. He slid it across the table toward me. What's this? I asked, voice quiet. Open it, he said. I unfolded it carefully. It was a check. Not a huge one. Not dramatic, but enough to make my breath catch. It had my name on it. Dad, I began, startled. He lifted a hand. "Before you argue," he said, and his voice had that old firmness in it. The father voice. The one that used to stop me mid-sentence when I was 16 and convinced I knew everything. I closed my mouth. He pointed at the check with a finger that trembled slightly. "That," he said, "is for you." "Why?" I whispered. He looked at me like the question was simple. "For your freedom," he said. My eyes stung. "Dad." He shook his head gently. "I heard you," he said. "Last year. I heard you on the phone, in the hallway, trying to be calm while someone was taking pieces of you. I didn't have the strength to fix it. I didn't have the words to help." He swallowed, eyes flicking away for a second, then back. "But I've had a little money set aside," he said. "Not much. I always meant it for something." "Practical." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Turns out," he said, "the most practical thing I can give my daughter is the ability to choose." I stared at the check, the ink on it suddenly blurred. "I don't need this," I tried to say, but my voice cracked. My father's eyes held mine. "Yes," he said softly, "you do." I laughed once, shaky, because crying felt too big for the kitchen. "What am I supposed to do with it?" I whispered. My father leaned back, looking tired but satisfied, as if he'd just finished a job he'd been holding on to. He said, "Whatever you want." Those 4 words were the real gift, not the check, not the money. Permission. Permission to stop proving myself to people who didn't deserve it. Permission to stop fighting thieves on their terms. Permission to build a life that didn't require me to constantly defend my right to exist in the room. I folded the check carefully and slid it back toward him. "I can't take it like this," I said, voice gentle. "I can't." My father's hand covered mine, warm and thin. "Take it," he said. "Not because you're weak, because you're smart. You know how to use a tool." I smiled through the sting in my eyes. "You're really calling this a tool?" He gave the faintest grin. "Everything's a tool," he said. "Even revenge." That made me laugh, a real laugh, surprising and bright in the quiet kitchen. My father watched me like he was memorizing it. And then he said almost casually, "By the way, I'm proud of you." I froze because those words, those exact words, were rare from him. Not because he wasn't proud, because he'd been raised in a world where pride was shown through action, not speech, through early mornings and full gas tanks and quiet sacrifices you didn't talk about. "What for?" I asked, voice small. He looked at me with a steadiness that made my chest ache. "For staying kind," he said, "when it would have been easy to become sharp." I swallowed hard, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Outside, the morning light finally decided itself. It slid into the kitchen through the window, pale and gentle, touching the table, the bowls, the check, my father's hands. And I realized something with a clarity that felt like a deep breath after holding it too long. The story had ended months ago in the boardroom, when Camden's facade cracked, but the real ending, the one that mattered, was here, in a quiet kitchen, with steam rising from tea, with a father giving his daughter the one thing the corporate world never wanted her to have: a choice. If you're enjoying these sleep stories, please this video, and let the next story play as you drift off tonight.